I'm Tyler Mathis, President and CEO of the Cape Breton Partnership. And on behalf of the organizers of this event, I'm happy to welcome you to tonight's conversation. And it is a conversation both with people up here and people in the crowd on the impact of transportation costs on life and work in Unama'ki, Cape Breton. The organizers of tonight's discussion, I'll mention them from the front, the Cape Breton Regional Chamber of Commerce, and welcome especially to the Vice Chair, Shelley Bennett-Triffus. I saw Shelley somewhere. Right there. Almost got away with it. The Port of Sydney Development Corporation, CEO Lorna Nicol is in the room, and they're our gracious hosts for this evening's discussion. The Scotia Rail Development Society, which was really the catalyst for much of these discussions, so we're happy to partner with them. And of course, the J.A. McCurdy Sydney Airport, Cape Breton University, the CBRM Regional Enterprise Network, and the Cape Breton Partnership. How this generally works is we're going to start with a small panel, 3 people, myself as moderator, to give us a base understanding of what we're trying to talk about here, and then there'll be a larger conversation with business owners from a wider diversity of experience and geography. And so I'm going to welcome our first 3 panelists up, and then I'll go finish kind of the housekeeping things. But first we have Paul Harrington with the Cape Breton Capital Group, and also from St. Peter's. So Paul, you get the pick of the seats. So everybody can judge you depending on where you sit. Dan McDonald, DMDE Engineering Limited and Vice Chair of the Cape Breton Partnership. And Kathleen Yurchison, VP Operations and Corporate Development with Novaport, and no stranger to this stage as the former CEO of the Chamber of Commerce. So welcome to all 3 of you. So we have these 3 people who are experts in their fields, have had lots of time to think about transportation systems, but we're starting with Paul Harrington with the Cape Breton Capital Group. And so Paul, maybe I'll get you to start with a little bit about what that means for those who don't, and maybe starting with a question that we had. And folks, we're not just coming up with these offhand. I literally have them written here, so I'm going to read them. In what ways can improvements to Cape Breton's transportation system help reduce the costs of goods and services, making them more affordable to local communities?
Sure. So for those who know about the Cape Breton Capital Group, we look at, it's an island group of angels that look to invest in entrepreneurs and succession planning for existing businesses on the island. And we only look and invest within the island. So that's a very high level overview. So from my perspective, I just want to throw out one aspect on infrastructure investment. Under the Global Infrastructure Hub of 2020, they said that any infrastructure investment had a multiplier of 1.5. In other words, for every dollar you spend, there will be an economic and benefits amplified from that investment. And I say that because, just keep that in mind, that was from a global perspective. I think when we look at transportation and investment, it's got to be holistic. It's got to be the whole island, and it's got to cover all aspects. So when I take that a little bit further, I think there are 3 questions that need to be asked. One is, why do we want investment in transportation? And by the way, transportation is just an element of infrastructure. Why do we want it? 2, what type of transportation do we want to invest in? And 3, what's the benefits? If I look at the first part, I'm just going to look at businesses, growth in businesses, and I'm going to give a couple of examples. Tourism. This island has some of the greatest facilities and attractions on the entire eastern coast. If you take Cape Breton and you look at Cape Smoky, under the guidance of Martin Kedgeville and what they're doing there and how they're building it out, they saw a 300% plus increase in skiers' passes between February 23 and February 24. That's 1. 2, if you look at our golf courses, we've got 2 of the best golf courses in North America. One of them, if I can remember correctly from the stats, is one of the top 10 in the world. I also look at the Port of Sydney. Did you know that they have or had last year, 118 cruise ships with 235,000 passengers. And that is just looking at tourism. You then look at the other aspects of growth of business, and you can look at bulk cargo. What's that mean? Well, we have two of the deepest ports in North America. And for that aspect, we can handle bulk with transportation investment. So I'm going to go on from growth in businesses to new business, which is what the island needs to attract as part of investment. We have, and I'm going to pick on two places. One is a Assurance Centre. Oh, sorry. Thank you for that. Someone actually waved. So the Assurance Centre. The Assurance Centre is one of the top 5 leading research institutes for biotech in North America. And why? Because they are just about to open up a 10,000 litre capacity for innovation in the biotech. If they get on to 100,000 litre capacity, you're looking at the top institution for research for biotech in North America. Second aspect, green energy. We're just about to open 2 hydrogen plants in Point Tupper, sorry. With that, and the expansion for green energy in hydrogen, what's the one thing they're going to need? Electricity. Electricity is not going to come from existing original power plants. It's going to be, if at the end of the day you look at it, it's wind. And we have, as an island, one of the best places in the world for constant supplies of high-grade wind energy provision. Last thing that I want to go on to on the why is the benefits to existing businesses and individuals. If we develop and invest in transportation, and I'm talking holistic here, those existing businesses and individuals can reap benefits, and I'll come on to that towards the end. Second question, what transportation do we need to invest in? To me, there's no specific one, it's all of them. Seabound transportation is cheapest in the world. We have, as I said, the 2 deepest ports. By the expansion and connection of those 2, we could take in more ships, bigger ships, more cargo for both inbound and outbound. If we then look at the, from a perspective of trying to connect them, we need rail. We need rail to connect the ports, to work together to get transportation of in- and outbound goods on and off the island. At the moment, it will all be done by road. We need infrastructure on our roads. Let's be honest, we've got 2 lifelines for this island, one up one side, one up the other. The roads, in all honesty, aren't the greatest. They're not used to vast, heavy-duty vehicles. You can see it. Most of the ruts and the edges are being worn away, and they will do. The weather and the sheer volume will wear them. We're not sufficiently reliant on those 2 veins. And as we saw the other week at Big Pond, you get one accident, you're blocking half the island off. The trucks especially, they can't turn around. They just get stuck there. It costs money, it costs time, and it cuts off the lifelines to the island. I then look at rail. As I said, we need rail to transport between the island and the goods to help the growth. And the final bit on that transportation, what's happening at the airport is fantastic. I can see the growth is going to come, especially with Miles driving that. However, we need to create the infrastructure that allows for more transportation, whether it's people or cargo via that airport. The infrastructure is there for the airport. It needs to grow and it needs the support. Last aspect, I'm sorry, I'm just dominating this, by the way. Last point, the benefits. The benefits are huge, trust me. If the infrastructure investment is provided for transportation, and I do think it needs to be a holistic, strategic plan that needs to be created, we will see a growth in jobs, a growth in new business, We will see efficiencies through a reliant chain of transportation. We will see environmental benefits because it's efficient. That all, at the end of the day, invites people to the island. And I'm going to go back to the group. We look for entrepreneurs, investment for new companies, succession planning. If you don't have the infrastructure, anyone who comes to the island will say no. And without that investment, we are just simply going to circle on ourselves, as I think it's been pointed out historically, when you look at people like the Father Greg McLeod, who said, basically, we have to look after ourselves. Well, time to stop. Time for investment in our transportation. I'm going to stop waffling now. Thanks.
I think we'll probably have some questions back and forth between the panelists in a bit, but I'll go to Dan first with a separate question. So Dan, kind of building off what Paul mentioned, you recently completed a report focusing on existing opportunities related to rail infrastructure. If you can maybe touch on some of the findings with respect to local business and how transportation systems in Unama'ki, Cape Breton enable our region to capitalize on those opportunities.
Okay, is this working okay? Thanks, Tyler, and I'm really glad to see the big turnout here. It's really important that everybody's supporting this, and it's just great. A couple of years ago, several businessmen here in Cape Breton decided that they were being impacted by the lack of rail. So they got together to lobby some of the politicians and the government people, and the Nova Scotia Department of Transportation put $25,000 in, and ACOA, federal government, put $25,000 for a $50,000 rail study. I put together a team to bid that study. I have contacts with rail experts across the country and got some of the top engineers and logistics experts to do that study. We were successful in winning it, and we completed that study. The idea was that when Genesee, Wyoming left, they said they needed 10,000 cars a year to make it viable. But so we went to see how many cars we could get from local business here. Kathleen's Novaport container terminal, if that went, the rail went, it was just part of it. But we're hoping that if we could see how many cars we could get without the container terminal, that would also help Kathleen's group to push it over the top. The end of the study, we did a lot of statistics. A lot of these experts I have are statistics, commodity experts. They understand commodities and movement of stuff by rail all across the country. The report is online with the partnership. I would say just read the executive summary because those statistics will put you to sleep. But we came up with a number of 9,300 cars, which wasn't the 10,000. Then the goalpost got moved. They said, no, we need more than 10,000. Nevertheless, we're close. We got to 9,300, and I think we're only one big carrier or one big user of the railway to put that over the top and to develop the economic plan that would make it viable. So later on, the other questions, I'll be talking about what possible users we could get to put us over the top and to get the rail back on going again. So my job was to coordinate these experts, and I also interviewed 16 major companies here. And I'll tell you, the response was great. Every company I interviewed says, yes, we want the rail back. We used to have the rail. We need the rail back. I did not have one negative interview where somebody said, no, we don't need the railway. So those 16 companies, some of them are represented in the room here today. Certain things like building supplies would be advantaged by rail. The other thing we did is we talked to Marine Atlantic, Gerald Glantz here, the VP, about the possibility of, one of the things was bringing in what they call TOFCs, trailers on flat cars. If you go out west, you see the flat cars with the trailers on them without the tractor, so they could bring them in. We looked at a terminal right beside Marine Atlantic, and Marine Atlantic loads what they call drop trailers, so it didn't really matter to them if they came in on a train or with a tractor, but it would certainly help with the transportation of goods to Newfoundland. We also talked to Newfoundland about how this could benefit the west coast of Newfoundland. So all in all, the report was fairly successful. We didn't get enough to get a rail line, but we got a lot of people thinking about it and a lot of great information.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. I'm sure some of the panelists will have some questions for you on that. But Kathleen gets the shortest question, but maybe the most interesting. You know, how does the current state of transportation, in your opinion, how does that affect the region's overall status in terms of opportunity for economic growth and impact to not only just the economics but the communities? What's your take on the current state of transportation?
Yeah, no, it's a valuable question to ask, and I think I always think it's important to focus on what we do have today, because we often, it's easy to see what we don't have, and I know that I'll mention rail in a second, but certainly in the past couple of years, as we've been promoting the Sydney Harbour and the value proposition of not only the harbour and the location of Sydney, but the entire region for an economic development opportunity that is tremendous. We also take the time to talk about all the things that we do have. So when it comes to transportation, and I know that my other fellow panelists have mentioned it, but we do have a fantastic regional commercial airport. We have a harbor that's adjacent to a 100 series highway. We have Marine Atlantic connecting mainland Canada into Newfoundland. Our harbor is dredged to 16.5 meters, so we have a navigational channel, which also makes us a strategic harbor for commercial development. So there's a lot of really fundamental assets, attributes to the many assets that we have within our region that makes us strategic to attract economic development. I think the biggest piece that we're missing, and often, you know, what's going to come up, I think, a lot in these conversations, is around rail. And as it relates specifically to Nova Port, which has been a development that has been in this community for more than 15 years, rail has been the inhibitor of the realization of that development. And back in 2014, when that became non-operational, it was never, I think, understood by anybody in the community that today would be sitting here, you know, 10 years later, and that rail line still sit non-operational today. But what we do have is we have a rail bed, and that rail bed does exist, and it does have the ability to be rehabilitated, whether it's for use for commercial use, as Dan referenced, or for tourism, as Paul referenced, and potentially even both. So I think from our experience, and just from my experience, both being at the Chamber and then certainly in the role that I am in today, is that we very much have a lot of strategic assets as it relates to transportation. And it is one of the fundamentals of economic development in any region. And we're strategic in many ways due to our location. So I think, you know, going forward, you know, certainly advocating and continuing to support the existing rail transportation, the existing transportation assets that we have. But the advocacy and the continuation of rail is integral to the future of Cape Breton, I believe. And not just from a port perspective, but just in terms of the way that the world is going. And as Paul mentioned, green energy, outside of just wind, but manufacturing, battery, fuel cell development, all critical minerals, all of these different opportunities, these economic opportunities, do require rail. And Cape Breton specifically is incredibly strategic from a location perspective globally in any one of those categories. And I have the privilege of working with Invest Canada, Invest Nova Scotia, and their investment attraction teams. We've been on the short list many, many times as it relates to many of these opportunities that I just referenced. And it's not to say that any of these global companies can never not come here, but certainly rail does often come down to rail and the risk that they're willing to take to kind of continue in the process of evaluating Sydney and Cape Breton Island as a viable opportunity to establish these types of facilities and factories here on the island. So I think, you know, we're not starting from scratch. We have much of the recipe to attract economic development opportunities, create significant job creation here in the region. But I do think today, as we sit here, I think rail is probably the single biggest transportation opportunity that we have before us. And we do have the asset on the ground today that does have the ability to be rehabilitated. And I think it's all of our hope that we do all live to see a day in the not so far future where we see that operational again.
So I have a list of questions, as you know, but you guys aren't shy. Is there any comments that you want to make kind of back and forth?
Yeah. Not shy. I look at, as you have both said, is about, the rail. I totally agree that rail would be a huge asset to the island. Totally agree. But to get the infrastructure repurposed and adequate to take volume, I think that as I go back to the holistic view about all aspects of transportation has to be addressed first. And the first one I always see is it's going to be road, simply because the vehicles are there already. I don't think it's the greenest way. I don't think it's ultimately the cheapest way. And I don't think it's healthy for tourism to see stacks of trucks. I'm sorry for those who are lorry drivers, etc., but that's how I see it. So my thing is, how long before rail can be introduced and the funding?
Dan, anything to add to that?
Yes, the hard part is the funding. Building the railway is not that hard, or renovating it. We could start tomorrow if we had the money, but the funding envelope is the issue, and who would fund it, and so that's the main. It always boils down to the money.
I would just add to that. I think with anything, there needs to be a business case, and there needs to be guaranteed business for a line, and so when we think of rail, it's not ever, I don't know if we'll ever see the Field of Dreams concept with the rail line on Cape Breton Island. We will fix it and then the business will come. There has to be a justification for that initial investment for the rehabilitation. If we knew that we could put rail cars on that rail today and it was just a matter of attracting the business, I think we'd be having a different conversation. But there's a significant investment that's going to go into that line, not only to rehabilitate the line for it to be operational, but for it to be able to handle the type of commercial operations that would be required today versus how it operated in the past. With that said, I think, as representing the Novaport voice today, but just also as somebody who lives and believes in the future of this island and certainly the CBRM, we have been steadfast in our vision to develop a multi-use port. And the narrative in the community today is that our focus is on green energy, offshore wind, but we've never abandoned our view of developing a multi-use port that could also welcome containers into our harbor, whether it be an entire, the full footprint or partial or what have you. But that requires a rail line, and it's always been the narrative of the chicken or the egg, what comes first. And so it's never been the fact that container cannot happen in the Sydney Harbor. In fact, we know with absolute certainty that it can, and we've been at the 11th hour in those discussions, but it's always come down to rail. So I think having the business case is incredibly important. And we've been a part of these narratives before, and not so long ago, about our airport during the pandemic. And there was a very scary time where there was no commercial flights at our airport, and there was this real fear that those planes would never come to Sydney again. And we did a lot of hard work in advocating for that at the time. But I think again, the fundamental conversation came down in working with the leadership at the time was around the business case for air in Sydney. So, and at that time we were obviously living in a very unique circumstance. So it is always going to come down to that, because the rail line, the airport, any of these modes of transportation does justify a business case. So I think that that's what we have to collectively not only understand, but also recognize that we need to do our collective efforts to ensure that we have take the opportunities to attract them as well.
Awesome. So I think Dan was going to kind of comment on that with some specific opportunities, but I'll let you lead into that, Dan.
Sure. Thank you. No, I just want to talk about a couple of years ago, and for 4 years, I worked with the Port of St. John, New Brunswick, as the owner's engineer for a $210 million redevelopment of the container side there. What they did, they were successful in getting gateway funding for that port. So they got $210 million about 60% of it was federal and 20% was provincial, and then they raised the rest of the money themselves. So what happened was they built the second container berth there, and with that happening, a lot of the container companies saw that, and there was a line that years and years ago, the CP line went from Halifax through the Annapolis Valley and across on the ferry to St. John and then on to Montreal. Back in the 80s, CP sold that line from St. John to Montreal to a small operator, much like ours was sold. And the same thing happened. They abandoned it somewhere in the late 80s. But with the, talk about the chicken and the egg, with St. John getting this second container berth, CP bought the line back, and it's about 280 kilometers. It's twice as long as ours, and they spend about $300 million rehabilitating that line. And now that line is operating between Montreal and St. John. They needed more container space for the growth, so they went back and got more gateway funding for $42 million. And that's just an example. The west side of St. John Port, if you go there, is all containers and other industry. The east side is cruise ships, just almost similar to what we have right here. And that port is becoming one of the most successful ports in Canada. And I think it's a model for us to look at, because you can't have, really, the railway wouldn't be successful without the port, and the port wouldn't be successful without the railway. So the St. John model that I worked on, and I think it's applicable for here. We just need the $200 million, that's all.
I'll empty my pocket. I'll empty my pocket.
Yeah, well, we won't pass the hat here, but well, we'll get a little ways there. But maybe Paul, I'll go back to you and kind of bringing this back. We've talked a lot about opportunities here that Kathleen and Dan have talked about. And you talked about some of the new opportunities that are emerging from the biotech industry, from the Verschuren Center and so on. But with those new industries, but what about our existing industries? Maybe you can speak a little bit to how do you think efficiency and reliability of a transportation system in whatever form, how does it affect the competitiveness of local businesses with their ability to either import goods, export goods, sell goods, perform? I think with your role with the Capital Group, you'll see some of those impacts that those businesses have and how it is either positively affecting them or perhaps negatively impacting them.
I will answer that question, but I just want to pick up what my two colleagues have spoken about. I think there is a huge connection between the ports that we have here and the future. And I keep thinking to myself, what is a catalyst to get that investment? What is it going to be? And one of the things that always strikes me, and it does lead on to, about what the benefits are to existing businesses. If I just take green energy, and I'm going to go on to wind farms, because whether we like it or not, those hydrogen plants require literally more energy to produce ammonia and green hydrogen than we produce at the moment for the entire island for everything. The 2035 EV requirements by the government require in excess, for if you put a pure statistic, and it's out there, for the whole of North America, 2,200 gigawatts of energy for EV alone in 2035. Now, realistically, I don't think it's going to happen. However, those plants each need around 1.5 to 3 gigawatts, and we produce 3.5 gigawatts as Nova Scotia. And I think that's going to be an interesting debate. I think that is a catalyst, is the wind farm aspects. For that, you need the ports, you need the infrastructure to be there. To transport it, you need the rail. What are the benefits to local business? If you look at what it takes to construct a single turbine, with its pylons, its concrete casements, literally the support aspects to it, whether it's offshore, and therefore the boats, the support, that's where benefits will come to businesses, both existing. We got the highest grade for concrete in North America, and it's on the island here. We can produce those blocks those floats that are required for offshore wind farms. I look at the greater picture and what's it mean for the rest of us? Well, here's the benefits and what it means for us and what it means for our future, for our children, our grandchildren, and anyone who else comes to the island. If you find that catalyst to get the investment in transportation, and I don't care where it starts, but I do agree rail is a very important aspect to this, is that you'll see more jobs. Because once you get businesses that have an efficient transportation process, which is economically viable, you should see competition. Competition normally drives prices downwards, but it also offers more opportunity and a variation of goods. It will also produce, by taking, if I look at it in the long term, vehicles off roads and putting it onto rail. There is a benefit to the environment. We don't need to damage what is a beautiful place. We don't need to do it. By doing that and taking more off the roads, less damage to the roads. Less damage to the roads also means more opportunity for tourism. Tourism for us is huge. Yes, it's seasonal. However, I'm going to go back to two aspects again. I look at what's happening in Cape Smoky and what they're trying to achieve. The golf courses we got here, just for two things. And I also look at by utilising the airport and getting more tourists and business personnel here, and with that, you will see business come along with good transportation. There is that overall benefit. When I look at the Visuran Centre, the reason I mention them, if they become the #1 biotech research institute in North America, I already know, speaking to some of their current companies that are there, that they are considering building manufacturing plants on the island. Why? Because they got the ports. They need feedstock coming in, and they need to export goods. The gateway to Europe and Asia and down the East Coast, it's there. It's already there. So we know that if we can just get the investment and push it forward, then you're going to see a natural growth and benefit to the island.
Hey, anyone want to comment on that? I'm going to go back again, I guess, to those. We're talking a lot about future growth and future opportunities. How do we see improvements? Do we think if there's any tangible things that a business person or a community member would see immediately, as opposed, no one likes driving into a pothole? That would be an immediate benefit.
I'll tell you, I mean this politely, the one thing that really annoys me about us being on the island here, cost of fuel. I still can't get my head. I know it costs a little bit to travel a few extra miles to bring fuel to us, but it really does annoy me to know that I can go off the island for about 50 k's and get it 2 cents cheaper. There's one benefit. And how inflation is damaging our pockets. And the reason is the cost of fuel, just for individuals, but for companies bringing products onto the island, we naturally have to see an uptick. So the moment fuel goes up 1 cent, we feel the pain, more so here than we do elsewhere. Sorry, that's me having a personal rant, but there you go.
Well, I think maybe going back to one of the studies that Dan talked about, you talked quite a bit about the companies you interviewed. Everybody was super happy about it. Did they see an ability to impact their community, not just their business, with the introduction of rail, or perhaps discussion on improved air service, either to one of the 2 airports on the island, or again to the road infrastructure? Is there something that you're thinking people aren't really talking about in terms of improvements to our transportation infrastructure that would have an outsized impact on people's everyday lives?
Yes, Tyler, I believe it's a global sort of thing internally here. Like, people aren't necessarily talking, the rail has been gone for so long. It's not a common sort of thing. The port has been here for a long time. Nobody in the general public's talking about the port development or the rail development or the roads or the airport. That's why we're here tonight, is we're trying to get public interest in how important this is to the whole community. Everything from building supplies to food, to all the stuff we do, stuff brought in for the big superbox stores. Everything relies on transportation. And our transportation system in Cape Breton is not that great for the reasons we're saying. We need development in the port, we need development in the rail, we need more business for the airport. So yes, it will mean a lot, the whole community, one step at a time.
Kathleen, are there any economic diversification options that we have? We've talked about green energy, we've talked about bioeconomy, we've talked a little bit about our traditional opportunities, but are there other diversification opportunities or job creation opportunities that we haven't landed on that you've touched on when you've been shaking the bushes with your development, or in maybe tangential connections that you've come across?
Yeah, I think excuse me, I think the conversation that Dan and Paul just had, I think, is super valid, because there does need to be a catalyst, right? The transportation infrastructure of this island fundamentally is a direct reflection of the economic health of the island, right? So as our transportation infrastructure improves or becomes more robust or is reintroduced, like rail, I think that will be only because of a direct reflection of what is happening economically on this island. The amount of opportunity that exists around rail infrastructure in 2024 versus even 10 years ago, I think, has dramatically improved, just the way that the world is shifting. I also think that having rail infrastructure located next to a strategic harbor that's largely underutilized but ready for commercialization is dramatically important in terms of our value proposition. And it all does kind of relate back to the green transition and the green economy and the way that the world is moving as it relates to manufacturing specifically. And if we were to attract one manufacturing plant in any category of green energy, not necessarily just related to offshore wind, but it could be for battery or fuel cell development, that is quite literally thousands of jobs, potentially even tens of thousands of jobs, depending on kind of the spin-off that happens around it. And those numbers are proven. That I'm not just saying those numbers. It's actually almost too big to even imagine at this point, in terms of what opportunity would exist in and around rail. And then also, I think critical minerals is something that I know has been within the narrative of economic development specific to this region, but also an enormous economic opportunity that also does justify rail infrastructure, and something that our island is incredibly rich in. So not to say that I can speak directly to that, but there are a lot of opportunities that could be justified, or that can be justified to support rail, but having a catalyst and having robust port infrastructure for industrious use, much like our development seeks to develop, is incredibly important. And then, as we know, the number of small businesses and startups that are spin-off of port development is tremendous. Offshore wind alone, with a robust hub port, has a spin-off of upwards of 150 to 200 small businesses within the local economy alone, directly related to energy or related industry around port activity. And that certainly doesn't include all other uses of port, like bulk, like container, and there's many others, So I think staying open to the idea of multi-use as an entire harbor is, I think, incredibly important. And also not abandoning our desire and our efforts to reestablish rail on our island. I think, again, I'll just reiterate that, we do have the asset today, although non-operational. It does require some work, but it's not out of reach. And I think ultimately the economic opportunities that come behind it. But if I were to highlight one that maybe we're not talking about as much, I think it is manufacturing. And we have already been qualified by the global marketplace that we are strategic on basically every other front outside of our transportation. So.
Thank you, Kathleen. Paul, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think the key point is that, you know, the
I think Dan, you wanted to respond to that too. I think we got time for one more question, or a comment.
Yes, I said earlier on when I started, I said our rail study showed us we're about one major customer away from making it viable. When I worked with these rail experts, my colleagues out west, I learned an awful lot from them. And one of the interesting things was the movement of potash. Now, the three biggest producers of potash in the world are Russia, Belarus, and Canada being the biggest. Matter of fact, BHP Billiton, the biggest mining company in the world, is building the biggest potash mine in the world, north of Saskatoon. So with the geopolitical, the world now, with the war in the Ukraine, Russia has been sanctioned by Europe, the US, South America, and all that, so they cannot sell their potash to those countries. Therefore, they have to sell their potash to China, which they teamed up with. So that means Canada's potash that was going to China is going to be reduced a lot because Russia that's the only place they can sell it. But on the other hand, Europe, Africa, Middle East, South America, all need potash. With 8 billion people in the world now, potash for fertilizer is becoming one of the most important ingredients. If you look at how are you going to get to Europe from Saskatchewan, or South America, or Africa, or the Middle East, it comes through the east coast of Canada. We have everything we need here in Cape Breton to put a port in here for delivering potash. And I think it's one of the things that could be really valuable here. Actually, in St. John, New Brunswick, as I go back to my St. John, they ship potash out of St. John from Saskatchewan. They have a big, huge terminal there. They had it for their mines that went down, but it's actually cheaper to ship it to, amazingly, from Saskatchewan to St. John, because it's basically all downhill. And if you go to the west coast, you got to go through the Rockies, and the fuel in the locomotives drives the transportation costs way up. So I see a tremendous opportunity for us here for potash. Some people may, we had the dusty coal and all the coal dust problems. Potash cannot get wet. So it's in a sealed shed here, it's in sealed rail cars, it goes on sealed conveyors into sealed boats. So the other one that was interesting that these my colleagues talked to me was about canola oil. Saskatchewan's also the biggest producer of canola oil. They sell a lot to China, but China has cut back in the last 3 years because of disputes with Canada, the two Michaels and stuff like that. So they're looking at shipping canola oil to Europe and the Middle East. And anybody went to the grocery store and saw what olive oil costs, it's amazing. The Mediterranean are looking for canola oil now as a replacement, another bulk commodity that could come through here. So I see lots of opportunities for Sydney Harbour, for the rail, and the whole thing with other commodities. We just got to get out there and market it. Tyler has put a request in to the provincial government for funding to do studies and to talk to people in Saskatchewan and other areas and sell our port. We got to get this message out there that we're available in that. And one last comment. When I was a young kid in the 50s, a long time ago, I used to live with my grandparents, and they lived in South Bar in the farmhouse. And I would at night count the boats that were in Sydney Harbour. I mean, nothing to have 9 coal boats lined up there waiting to get into the international pier. Boats with iron ore coming in for Sydney Steel to make the steel. Boats with steel going out. The naval base was here, military boats were here. The whole harbour was full. And all steel and coal are gone. I'd like to see with this new commodities that this harbour to be full again. Right, Kathleen? Container boats, offshore wind. Okay, thank you.
As part of this session, we'll introduce the guests. They'll come up and take their seat. We have some predetermined questions for them. And the second part of that will be an open mic question and answer from the audience. So let me invite the individuals up here. Hoyles Whiting from Polysteel Atlantic. Polysteel Atlantic is a manufacturer of synthetic rope for the fisheries industry. They produce locally but export their products around Atlantic Canada. Brad Jacobs, Colburn Auto Group. Brad is the general manager of Colburn Auto Group's car dealership network, which brings manufactured vehicles into the region from North America. Oh, okay. Mara Brown and Nolan Brown, Castle Building Supplies, BML Metals and Roofing, manufacturers of metal roofing and gutter products, and vendors of building supplies, sending products all over Nova Scotia. Ryan McDonald from Tom McDonald Trucking was unable to join us this evening, so regrets from Ryan. So we have Jim Gillis, Escazone Cold Storage and Live Store, an operator of cold storage and warehousing facility in Sydney involving live lobster storage. And Reed Campbell, Polytech Windows, manufacturer of windows and doors in Cape Breton for residential and commercial construction. Is Reed here? Okay, so Reed is not here. All right. So we have 5 panelists here, so it should be quite busy. So what we'll do, just a little housekeeping for our panelists. Sometimes we get excited and we really want to talk about and have some passion about the topic, but we have a limited amount of time. So I'll be sitting right here, and this is for the panelists. And as you answer a question, if you're getting a bit lengthy, I'll approach the podium and that'll be your signal to wrap it up, and we move on to the next question or the next candidate. So, all right, so first question, and it's geared to all of the panelists. How does the transportation system impact your business and community, the current transportation system? So we'll start at the end and we'll work right across the stage.
Am I on? Okay. Well, thanks for coming out today, guys. At Live Store Sydney, we are a cold storage. There's a few different things we do there, but our prime business is cold storage for the seafood industry. So pretty much everything that comes and goes is on a tractor trailer. So transportation is critical to our business. We don't really have much to do with the trucks themselves. It'd be the people that are shipping the product that send their trucks, but we're dealing with them every day. The other thing that we do there is we pack containers that'll end up in Halifax and shipped off to Europe or Asia. So a port here in Sydney would certainly help us out a lot. So we're hopeful that comes someday. But yeah, that's it. We're loading and unloading trucks every day at the cold storage facility.
This on? Perfect. So, Kent, thank you for the opportunity here tonight. Just for those that are here and don't know me, like Kent, my name is Hiles. It's okay. It just, but nonetheless, well, transportation, of course, it's huge for us. We typically bring in, 5 to 6 million pounds of product from the Gulf of Mexico or from Asia, convert that into rope, and virtually every pound of it is shipped back out. So, I've got stuff coming here on ships, trying to get to Halifax as far as close as we can get it. Rail cars coming and stopping in Port Hawkesbury, and then I got to store it there, ship it by truck down to us. So, yeah, everything to bring our material in. And then, when it comes to just business meetings and whatnot, our airport, it takes a lot for me to get around the Maritimes if I want to go and visit some customers in Newfoundland or Halifax. I got to jump in a car and spend a day or two driving or whatever. Can't just jump on a plane in the morning, fly somewhere and drive or come back in the evening. When I moved here in 2017, you could actually hop on a plane here, go to Halifax for a meeting in the morning, meet with some customers or clients, and be back for supper. It was a little bit convenient, but nonetheless. But no, there's all kinds of opportunities with transportation here, even to the point of, we'll bring it down to a local topic in just the local public transit and some of the challenges and opportunities that's providing. There's more and more of our folks here in our workforce that are using public transit today than 5, 10, 15 years ago, and we need to be able to get them to the, the industrial centers, the SID ports, the North Sydney industrial parks and places like that. So anyway, thank you. So.
Good evening, folks. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. So Colborne Auto Group has 2 car dealerships. We have a Ford dealership and a Chrysler dealership. And supply chain for us is incredibly important. I mean, we're in an industry that's supply chain dependent. We actually have our vehicles come to us part of the way by rail. So we have a number of vehicles coming from Mexico, number coming from the US, Kansas City and Illinois, Ohio, and also from Canada. When those vehicles come, they stop by rail until they get to Moncton. And then when they get to Moncton, they will sometimes sit for as long as 30 to 45 days before they get to Sydney. So any business person would tell you that 2 of the most important elements of doing successful business are time and the time value of money. And what happens in our industry, which creates a bit of a bottleneck, is that the transportation providers, the haulers that take the vehicles to us, are understaffed and overwhelmed. And this has been an increasing problem since COVID. So when those vehicles are leaving the rail yard in Mexico or the US or Canada and they're being shipped to us, we get invoiced for that product the day that it's sent. So I also pay interest on that product every day, even when I don't have it in my possession at our dealerships. So you can imagine the opportunity that we would welcome to somehow figure out how to eliminate a bottleneck in Moncton and figure out how to get vehicles to us quicker. We're paying for those vehicles, we're invoiced for them, and they will sometimes sit. So any opportunity for us to look at rail as a mechanism to get product to market quicker, of course we would be interested. So I'll stop there and thanks for your time.
Hello, my name is Nolan. I'm with BML Roofing and BML Metals. For those who don't know me, we manufacture architectural metal roofing in the west side of Cape Breton. We're located in Margaree. Bringing product in for us has been one of the largest hurdles for our business. I mean, we could have, I guess, when we decided to build the facility and manufacture here in Cape Breton, one of the things we knew would be a problem would be logistics and bringing materials in, and it is definitely a problem. We bring in a couple $1 million or couple million pounds of metal a year typically, and that's from Ontario, Montreal is where we bring them in from, and it's usually by truck. And as Kathleen mentioned earlier with the railway, and it'd be nice to get a railway in place, a lot of the problem is the port would probably be better to come first. Is, you know, we can get trucks to come here. They won't come because there's nothing to backhaul. We can get them as far as Truro. Trucks will come to Truro. They won't come any further. There's nothing for them to take out of here. And until we get that problem fixed, I think we're always going to have that issue of transportation problems. So we've been, I guess, in business now 5 years, and we do manufacture and we ship out throughout the province. Once we have the materials, we look after our own transport from there, and that side works. But we fight every day to get our materials here.
Hello. Oh, there we go. Thank you again for the invite, for letting us come here tonight. I don't really have much more else to touch on, as Nolan and I work side by side together, but definitely for us, for the building supplies, it would be a benefit for the cargo ships for sure to come for us with all the building supplies. We struggle every day with, you know, like Nolan said, trucking and shipments. So having that, or even the rail, for another source of transportation would be beneficial.
Thank you very much. So our second question, and we'll start with Hiles. What improvements to the system would you, a transportation system, would you like to see, and how would that benefit your business?
All right. What would I like to see? I think I'd be lying if I didn't say rail. I think that's basically what we're here for. You know, when I think about it, we bring in so much raw material, and I can only store so much of it in Port Hawkesbury. I'm paying to store it, I'm paying to keep it, I'm paying a fortune to ship it here and truck it here. I'm also unable to watch the market and order in larger quantities. If I could order 4, 5, 6 rail cars at a time when the price is a little low, I could store them in my yard at the plant. It makes a huge difference to us when you're talking, like I said, 5, 6 million pounds a year. So that would have a huge impact on the bottom line, frees up an awful lot of money for me to do, or for us to do, some innovation and automation and some maintenance and improvements to things to make us even more competitive and put us in a better place in the market. The more we can steal market share from others, the more opportunities for employment and growth, and it just compounds. So yeah, if I had one thing, that would be it. Second, I would ask for another couple of flights in around the Maritimes, because I think that's really impacting suppliers coming here, technical experts coming. When you need them, you're delayed, and you're delayed if you need people. So that's hurting things as well. So thank you, Kent.
Yeah, I kind of already answered the question, I guess, but speed of product to market is extremely important. So getting the product here quicker, and eliminating interest cost of paying for that product and not having it, not having the ability to sell it. The other thing is that we typically pay $1 a kilometer to transport vehicles to us when we purchase them outside of the regular distribution from the manufacturer. So I would think there'd be a little bit of cost savings to be able to transport vehicles that we purchase. We buy from Ontario and Quebec regularly, so to get those vehicles here, to have another option other than waiting for a truck, would be a whole lot better.
For us, I guess it would be, again, bringing it in. On average, we typically pay out of Montreal. If we were shipping out of Montreal, we pay by the pound. And I'll use just your typical gauge would be 26. So the average of that would be £1 per square foot. And as a high, we would pay up to 32 cents a square foot, or a pound. So that gets pushed off to the consumer. So as we're manufacturing from Cape Breton and moving back out in towards Canada or the Atlantic provinces, we're already coming we're 14 cents, 15 cents more just for our location than New Brunswick or Halifax. So it makes it harder for us to come to even play ball. So that would be our biggest struggle. So if there was another way, again, due to the fact there's nothing for anyone to backhaul. We are fortunate sometimes we can get piggyback ride on trucks going to Newfoundland, so we'll be able to put some of our load on that and keep our costs down. But on average, they're fairly high.
Okay, Mara. Okay. All right, back to you, Jim.
Yeah. Thank you, Keith. For us at Live Store, we're all about export. We move anywhere from 12 to 15 million pounds a year. It all goes by truck now, and that's more expensive than rail and by ship. Pretty much all that we ship out is going to either the United States, Europe, or Asia. So having a rail line or a port would really help our business grow. Although we're full now, and we've been full for a year or so, we would expand. We could expand with rail and a port. So that's the reason I enjoy coming to these meetings, to see if there's a chance that it's going to happen. And I think we all hope it does. So I think with the right people pushing ahead, we may see it someday. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So the third question, of course, some of our panelists are covering off on it already, but do you see value in the reopening of the rail line from Port Hawkesbury to CBRM? And does the cost concern you if there was a requirement for private enterprise to contribute some of the ongoing rehabilitation? Let's start with Brad.
Wow, thanks. Look, I mean, I think at the end of the day, everybody wants to see opportunity to see the island prosper and business grow. I'm on the board of the Cape Breton Partnership, so I know that's something the board and the staff are working on incredibly hard. I mean, I think if this is going to happen, it's going to take investment at all levels to make it happen. You know, Dan referred to some of the cost to rehabilitate the line, if that were to happen. It's an expensive endeavor. But I think that's where, you know, the business case needs to be demonstrated. And if we're looking for investment, being able to sell that business case is extremely important. So if you're provided with an opportunity to invest in something that's going to grow the island and the economy and your business, I think anybody would be interested in considering how they can help.
I agree with Brad. It's, you know, I mean, we're all islanders and we all want to see it prosper. That's the reason we're all here and we try to make it work. It's, and I think it's going to be an investment in everybody. And it's the only way it's going to move forward. You know, the more infrastructure we can bring back to the island, the better. You know, and in competition, as they spoke earlier, and in different avenues. You know, there's lots of opportunity. It just needs to happen. And I think everyone, as a whole, I think in the long run, it would be worth it for everybody.
Well, like Brad and Nolan had stated, it would be nice to, you know, have another source, and not only for that, but, you know, for us as well in manufacturing and in the building supplies for export. You know, it would be another source for us to move our materials farther and to grow our business, but also it's another opportunity for us to bring new families home and build our communities and build our island.
Okay, Jim, and then Hoyles.
Yes, I also agree with the rest of the panelists here that an investment in that would be beneficial. I think the long-term investment would pay off anything you had to put in initially, and yeah, I'd be in favor of that.
All right, thank you. Let me think about this for a minute. Yes, of course, it would be beneficial to every manufacturer and every consumer on the island. The cost of getting goods here and getting it off the island, everything lowers. We can get rail and get it here. The opportunities that it will bring. I mean, Kathleen and the port. You're not going to have a port here if you don't have a rail. But. You talked, I think you started the conversation, Kent, and said, you know, would you be interested in investing a little bit in it if you had to? And the thing that comes to mind when I think of probably one of the largest folks to benefit from a rail here, and Dan will correct me if I didn't mishear him, he talked about 93 or 9,700 cars, I think, a week or something coming in. Well, you convert that into trucks. That's over 500 trucks on our roads. Well, they eat up our highways dramatically. You would save, the provincial government would save over roughly $10 million a year in road maintenance, not to count the, you know, rail is roughly 75% more efficient than truck. Our second largest contributor to greenhouse gases in the province is transportation, right? At a number like about 30% of our greenhouse gas emissions, and you got this type of opportunity that virtually every truck that's heading to Newfoundland we can put on a rail. There's nothing but benefit all the way around in this, and I'm not sure all the players are at the table. So thank you. I don't see a few of them here today.
Okay, so in a moment we'll move to our open mic and questions from the audience. But I want the panel to think about the final question of the night after we do some questions from the audience. The final question to the panelists would be, and you have some time to think about it, how should we move forward from tonight's meeting? So I do have one written question from the audience. The question relates to rail. Speaking about rail, what is the feasibility and opportunity to connect the island with Halifax, both for tourism and commercial purposes? And that's in relation to rail. So we'll start with Jim on the end.
Can you say that again?
Say it again. Speaking about rail, what is the feasibility and opportunity to connect the island with Halifax, both for tourism and commercial purposes?
Well, I guess I'm old enough to remember the rail liner that traveled back and forth between Halifax and North Sydney. There's a lot of talk lately about that tourism aspect of the rail, and I truly believe that given the right opportunity, that would, besides the cargo, that the tourism aspect would be beneficial also. I mean, our numbers just keep growing every year with tourism, and I think that would add to the traffic that need it. So between that and cargo, I think that's one way to look at this is tourism. Thank you.
You know, when you talk about feasibility, of course it's feasible. I don't know if it's what it takes to get it there. I'm not. You would want to talk to Dan or some of the other folks on the realities of it, but it's possible. It's probably a little bit feasible, and depending on where it fits in the scheme of it, by itself maybe not, but as an adder to a goods and services, yeah, I think it completely fits there. So,
I guess I would say any opportunity to increase traffic flow between Halifax to Sydney is a good thing for the island. And when you think about tourism, you think about event management, you think about running events, you think about moving people for events, it's only another option. So I think it would be, obviously for tourism, it's an added bonus.
Running out of things as it comes down the line. No, I agree with it, with tourism. I mean, it's like anything, history repeats itself and it's going to run its cycle. You look in Europe and overseas, it's all train, you know. Fossil fuels, we burn a lot of, fossil fuels with transport, and things are starting to go back the way it is. Railways are busier for commercial use, for passenger use, and I think that's the way of the future again, and it's just a matter of time until it unfolds.
Okay. Question again. Speaking about rail, what is the feasibility and opportunity to connect the island with Halifax, both for tourism and commercial purposes?
Well, I agree with Brad. It's definitely a benefit to have, both connected, as it does bring people to our area that may not be able to come. It showcases our side of the island as well, as more people are able to come this way. As for the commercial side of it, it allows, another source of transportation for both sides of the island.
Okay, so now we're going to invite the three panelists from the previous session up on stage to help us with some of the questions coming from the audience. We have enough. Yeah, we have enough chairs. Oh, yeah, down here. Oh, you got a chair there. Yep. And just a reminder, the last question of the evening, how should we move forward from tonight's meeting? Just so folks can think about it. In the meantime, got another written question from the audience. It's about the rail subsidy. With the news of the ending of the standing rail subsidy, how can we ensure that money be earmarked for spending either here in Cape Breton or to benefit Cape Breton, specifically in rail investment? And we can start with Dan on the end and come right across.
Okay, Kent, that's a tough question. I mean, it's the government who paid the subsidy and the government that took it off. So it would be great if that money would come to do studies on the rail and help us get the rail, but I can't really speak for the government, what they'll do. But I'd just like to respond to the last question, well, I mean, as I got the mic. In terms of the tourism and the commercial for a passenger train between here and Halifax, at this point in time, that's kind of far out there. I mean, in my past job, I traveled a fair bit in Ontario where I loved the train. You get on the train, you know, you get a big armchair there, 3-course meal, Wi-Fi, relax, 140 miles an hour, Ottawa to Toronto. And I would love to have that here now, but that's a whole different animal. Like the freight trains are going to be the old way, clickety-clack with the thing. You need welded rails, reinforced concrete ties, a different base. I don't think people would take it if it was longer than 4 hours or if it was uncomfortable. So I think it's a little far down. It would be lovely to have it. I would love to go on the rail between here and Halifax, but I don't think it's feasible at this time.
Well, I recall, like I said earlier, riding the train. I lived in Alberta in the late 70s, and I was lucky enough to, my father worked for CN, so I had a free pass, so I traveled across Canada at least 3 times on the train. And I'll tell you, when you get off after 6 or 7 days on a train, it's rough. But as far as the feasibility or the funding from the government, it's unfortunate that that was cut. But I think we should speak to our local politicians and see if we could use that money in other ways to move this project along. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I would just echo that same comment, and I think also it's was encouraging news that CN now has a stake in that line, and I think there's certainly an opportunity for us all as a community to wait and see how CN plans, what their plans are for this line. And I think ultimately understanding what the business case is going to come down to that. So.
Yes, so business case, absolutely. And my question when it comes to this subsidy that was removed is, I believe there's a business case for a subsidy to save taxpayers' dollars in other avenues and venues if you can put the right folks at the table. And like I said, I'm looking around the room, I don't see a few folks that probably should be around the table that are stakeholders that would, I'm sure, be in front of the camera if they could.
Okay, Brad?
I think funding is a sensitive topic, and that's kind of why we're here. So I'll reserve part of my answer for the last question, but would say that there's a tremendous amount of research that needs to be done. Dan, and kudos to Dan and their team for what they've done, but I think his study spoke to the fact that regardless of what the number of cars were, the interest is there. And it comes down to taking that research a step further and having the proper conversations with the right people.
I think it's going to, as we get towards the end here, it's going to be harder to add to what everyone else said, but the removal of subsidies, as you can tell, I'm not born and bred here. I come from the UK. We have a large rail infrastructure there, and trust me, they give subsidies, they take them away. It's political blow of the wind as it is on the day. Nothing's going to change on that point. But when it comes to funding, I've got views on that one as well.
I think living in Cape Breton, we're going to be fighting with the government to give funding here. It's like everything that we pay in taxes here, it goes to HRM for the majority, and they're not going to want us to have a port here. I mean, they don't want a port and a railway. It's going to tap into their economy. So I think we'll have to fight. It's going to be hard for it to, I think, ever come to light.
Yeah, I agree with all of the panelists up here, but I definitely think that, government funding is definitely an issue and it's something that needs to be addressed. But I think that after tonight, after, all of us coming together and, everyone having a benefit or, a great opinion towards this, that, forming a meeting afterward would definitely, go forward and, maybe getting the government interested.
Just checking with the partnership folks to see if there was any more questions. And we do have one gentleman here in the front that has a question. Okay, the mic is coming.
Hi, I'm Andy Pittman, and I have 3 questions here. One is, how many people in here know that in Newfoundland's constitution, they're guaranteed rail right to Port aux Basques under Section 38? How many, put up your hand if you knew that. Nobody knows that. Nobody in Newfoundland knows that. We had a meeting with Mike Kellaway about that to see if we'd push it in Newfoundland. Never got an answer back. Not one answer. So that's why. Why don't we get answers from our MPs? The other question I'd like to know is from Paul. I never really heard about Cape Breton Capital Group before. So who are they? Where do you get your funding? The other thing is, 1/3 of the cost to every individual in Cape Breton on their goods is added because of our logistics that we don't have. And number 1 is rail. We have a single-lane highway from here to Port Hawkesbury. Very few passing lanes. The speed limit goes from 100 kilometers an hour to 30 through the school zones. Nowhere else in the world, nowhere else in Canada for sure, does that happen. Nowhere on a Trans-Canada highway that services part of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. Why? Thank you.
Paul, do you want to answer that?
Okay, I'll take the next half hour.
Yeah.
So, Andy, to your question to me, the Cape Breton Capital Group, which I mentioned and probably didn't get everyone to hear at the beginning, is made up of angel investors. They have a connection to the island. These individuals got together over a period of years and decided to put their own money into an organisation, a company, the Cape Breton Capital Group, that looks to invest in entrepreneurs and into existing businesses that want succession planning. However, there is criteria. We do not go off the island. We are only focused on investment on this island. Is it made up of hundreds of millions that can pay for rail? Absolutely not. It's small. It's like everything else. We got growth. We got growth for the next few years, but we look to invest and help. And that's is entrepreneurs looking to start with good common sense businesses, and also to help with succession planning of existing businesses where the incumbent is either retiring, is ill, or they want to get rid of the business. And we want those businesses to stay and survive and preferably be bought out by its staff. So hopefully that answers your question, but happy to spend more time on it.
I saw another hand go up on this side. Okay, there's 2 of them here. Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chen. I have two questions. First one is about our post situation and high-skilled workers is definitely make a lot of countries can be jealous, and the revival of tourism and education definitely give us more opportunity to get it through of this. But this kind of a third industry, if it's isolated, it's hard to create more high-paying job and make sure that the reinvestment is stay locally and local people can benefit from that. So I'm wondering, is there any changes we can be forecast for the productivity industry, like manufacturing or agriculture, which can make those revenues stays here and those revenue really benefit to the local people. And another step is we already suffered, lost our railway system once. So we don't want that happen again. We want this railway system can be controlled with Canadian controlled, Nova Scotian controlled, or Alberta controlled the best. So do we have any plan to make sure this system, no matter it's rebuilt or operating on all this process, it can be Alberta have voice on this process and make sure that all the stakeholders have the long-term confidence for that. Thank you.
Okay, who wants to start?
I
Okay.
I want to unpack what you said, right, very quickly. First one was about retention. What I heard were retention of profits and revenue within the island. That was the first part. Second part is the control of the railway system on the island. Is that correct? So on the first part, I think if you look at true economics, you're unlikely to retain all that revenue on the island. And the business people here would tell you, you have to pay for things to go away, right? You have to invest. We as an island don't have everything available to us. Therefore, we have to import it. Therefore, your revenue is disappearing. If you're talking about profit, profit is normally used to reinvest to grow business. And yet again, it's skills, it's materials, it's general infrastructure and costs that go with it. I think if you want to look at retaining revenue, and I'm going to be really awkward on this, you need to ask the political system on taxation and give more tax benefits and subsidies to businesses to allow them to grow in the first place. After that, you can address the rest. On the second question, I think that's suited to someone else who knows more about rail.
Okay, anyone else want to tackle that question? No one else? Okay. Kathleen?
Yeah, I would just say that as we know the ownership today in the rail, with CN acquiring a stake, CN is a Canadian-owned corporation that has a long history and owns many rail assets right across the country into the Midwest, U.S. and throughout. So I don't think any of us certainly, well, I can't speak for everybody, but that there's a concern of that today. And I think, in fact, it's encouraging with the news of CN acquiring a stake in the line. And as I commented before, it will be interesting to see what their intentions are for the line as we go forward.
Okay, one more gentleman here. Yeah, second one in, yeah.
Kathleen, the Novaport, you just say the harbour is ready for shipping, kind of now. And my question to you was about the navigational aids. I have two questions, one for you and I believe it's Dan on the end. I think I might have got the answer a minute ago, but you aren't seeking any new business. You just don't go afar to try to bring in business. Somebody mentioned canola oil and stuff like that. Have they ever mentioned silos, grain, corn, wheat, barley? We got the land here for the silos. We got the harbour to ship them ships. And we got the people that want to work them. And I'm just thinking outside the box.
I'll answer that. You're 100% right. That's what we're hoping for, whether it be potash, whether it be grain, whether it be wheat, whether it be canola oil. We are well positioned. And the way the world is now, we're the closest port, us in Port Hawkesbury, to supply this to the countries in Europe and South America and Africa that need it. 100%, you're right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Eastern Sea, the closest port on mainland North America.
But we're strategic, and yeah, 6 miles off the Great Circle route, and yeah, the closest port of call on the eastern seaboard, which, so again, it just plays into, we have the right recipe. As it relates to nav aids, I know that there are representatives from the Port of Sydney in the room, including Lorna Campbell, but that work is being completed right now. I think it's starting this week. Yeah, Don Rowe is in the audience as well. So it's the installation, or the activation, I guess would be the better word, is starting this week and is expected to be completed within the next few weeks. So that project is done, which is incredibly exciting. And again, just adds to the strategic, our value proposition as a strategic harbor ready for commercialization.
Thanks, Kathleen. All right, so we're down to the last question. Is there any more questions from? Yes, we got one more over here. Yeah.
There. Is this on? On? Okay,
yeah,
great.
On.
A question, Paul, you mentioned that the cheapest way to ship anything is by sea. Ideally, that's the most efficient way to do it. So then if I'm a shipper on land, my goal would be to get to a port as quickly as possible over at least geographical distance. So if, say, for example, I'm in Saskatchewan using Dan's example, and I want to ship potash, what would be the drive to come to Cape Breton, like bypass Montreal or St. John or any other port along the way and come all the way to Cape Breton? What would be our comparative advantage to those other ports, or what comparative advantage would we need to compete with those other ports?
So Dan, do you want to take that one?
Sure, yeah, you're correct, but one of the things is, like I mentioned St. John, where I worked a lot in New Brunswick. That port, I talked to the CEO before I left and said, what are your expansion plans? He said, we don't have any, because we don't have any more room left in the port. They have the big nutrient potash terminal there that takes a large portion of the port, and they're already doing that. Montreal, I understand, is the port is basically full, but what makes it better, we have land. Over at Sidport, in Kathleen's area like that, we can put a potash terminal will take a lot of room for the big sheds, because the potash cannot get wet. It's got to be closed in big sheds. It needs a big rail loop to continue soup. So I guess the answer is, why would they come here? And I think it's land adjacent to the water and lots of area for development. Like all these cities like Montreal and New York over the last hundreds of years, and Baltimore, they've all grown up around the port. Outside the fence of the port is a bunch of condominiums, so they got no room to grow like we have. So I think that's what our advantage is. Wouldn't you say, Kathleen?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a significant amount of points that you can make around the value proposition of the Sydney Harbour, and specifically Novaport being the port development in the harbour. But when it all comes down to it, what makes us stand out more than any other port on the eastern seaboard, not only in the northeast US, but down the eastern seaboard even further, is just the sheer size of the amount of available land that is ready for industry development, and that is not adjacent to urban centers. So if you look at a port like Montreal or St. John, even Halifax, it's surrounded by urban development, and which basically landlocks them in and doesn't allow them to develop it further. where we have a strategic harbor that has a lot of available land that would not impede on urban growth or urban development. And then we also have other great assets, which we are an urban community. So we have population, we have room to grow that population, and so on and so forth. So that's really is our value proposition at the end of the day.
Okay, so we're ready for our last question. We'll come back to Dan and Kathleen and Paul to answer that last. We'll let our panelists up here answer it first. How should we move forward from tonight's meeting? And we'll start with Jim Gillis and come across, and then we'll do Hiles and Brad and Nolan and Mara.
Well, after listening to the panel here tonight, lots of great ideas. But I guess we just got to continue pushing it on. I mean, with Novaport and the ports and the chamber, leading the way. I think, we also should, rely on our local politicians. I know there's an election coming up, so put the pressure on those guys. A lot of the money for any railroad is going to be coming from them, and that's what I think we should do, is just keep pushing ahead and keep having meetings like this. I think it puts the word out, and that we're still looking to push Cape Breton ahead here.
I don't know if I can add anything to it other than to continue the conversation and just have the folks around the table and just continue it.
I spent a large part of my life raising money. And the way that you do that is to be able to talk to people about two things: need and impact. And I think if we're going to be successful, because this is ultimately about money, it's how are we going to acquire the money to rehabilitate the line to run it. Yes, there's all kinds of other questions. That's probably the biggest obstacle. So the case for support to chase the people that need to be chased and have the conversations and help people see that this is not a want, it's a need, and to be able to tell the story about what the impact is. And who does that and when they do it and how that gets done, that's a whole other question. But there's a lot of great people in the community. I think it starts with trying to define what the case for support is.
I think we'll have to wait until the feasibility of the case study comes back and helps prove whether it's feasible or not. We're going to need a lot of support from the municipality, of course, federal government, provincial government, and the community. I mean, the community's got to want it. The need's got to be there, and I think it is. Everybody wants to see growth in Cape Breton, so I think the biggest thing is you got to, keep it fresh in the mind and keep the conversation active. Being proactive right from the beginning and continue it. Maybe continuing having meetings like this to keep it active so it doesn't get forgot about and drag on year after year after year as it's done in the past.
I guess just, keep pushing the word forward and maybe having these different meetings in different parts of Cape Breton and bringing everyone together and seeing what everyone has come up with, and then bring forth a business plan or, objectives to the right people.
Okay. Dan, Kathleen, and then Paul. Yep.
Okay, thanks, Ken. The only thing I'd say, I spent a lot of my career as a consulting engineer, I still am, but working for a bigger company and bidding on engineering jobs, and you don't win them all. If I lost an engineering job because the other competitors did a better proposal or had a better price, that was fine. What really got me was when I go to the client and say, how come you gave it to them? And they said, we didn't know you could do that. So I've learned that the worst thing is you have to get the knowledge out there. We have to sell our port. We have to sell our railway. We have to get information to sell it. So just putting a plug in for Tyler's transportation study that he has into the provincial government, that's what that study would do. we would get facts and documents we could go to Saskatchewan or Alberta with and say, here's our port, here's what it does, here's what it does. Here we are, come see us. Tyler and I even talked about inviting all these companies into here during lobster season, which is now, and putting on part of it. So Tyler still has, the partnership still has that application in, so it's not, when we're talking billions of dollars here, we're talking a couple of $100,000 or $300,000 for this. It's what we need to move forward. It's step one.
I would just add, what I think we need to do after today, and what I've always believed we need to do, is we need to support economic development opportunity on this island. We need to speak positively about the potential of this place. We need to believe in the many businesses. Every single one of us up here represent private business. Not one of us are representing government. And that is an important thing to note, because this island is built on the backs of small business, and it has the potential to be built on the back of tremendous opportunity around global industry. And I think we talked a lot about what those categories were tonight. And even in listening to the second part of the panel around the potential for, receiving cars, building an auto port, we're looking at manufacturing not just as manufacturing as I explained it, but as the BML Metal explained it, right? Like, manufacturing doesn't have to also be thousands of jobs, but there is an opportunity to scale up the existing businesses that exist on the island today. So we have an enormous amount of resources. I speak for Novaport, but I speak for all the opportunity that exists around the harbor, the rail, the potential of this place. But, the narrative that we communicate out into the community and then, fundamentally to the world is incredibly important. So I think speaking positively about the opportunities that exist on our island for the future is very, very important in terms of, attracting the world to this place. Because ultimately, if we ever realize a container terminal and build a rail line, it's going to be in partnership with global companies that see the potential of Cape Breton Island as a strategic position on a global scale. So I think my ask is to keep the conversation going, of course, and to continue to advocate for the reinstatement of the rail line, but also speak positively about all the opportunities that exist for not only CBRM, but for the entire island of Cape Breton.
Okay, I'm the last one. From my perspective, to take this forward, we need to find and lobby and win political influence at provincial and federal level. On top of that, we need a holistic strategic plan that covers the things that I said, and Brad repeated as well. It's your why. Why do we need it? 2, what do we need? And 3 is the benefits. And remember, with anything where you want big money, you have to show them a return. And without lobbying to get the right people to support and show there are benefits, I don't care if it's to do with green or it's to do with money or whatever, you have to show a return. And particularly with governments at all levels, they want something to hang their hats on. And if you can show that in your strategic plan, then we've got a good chance.
Excellent. So thank you, Dan McDonald, Jim Gillis, Kathleen Yurchison, Hiles Whiting, Brad Jacobs, Paul Harrington, and we got Mara and Nolan Brown. Thank these panelists. Give them a big round of applause. They did a great job. And thank you to everyone that attended this evening. It's great questions. Everybody seemed to be fully engaged, and we really appreciate your coming out this evening. And I hope you've got some nuggets you can take away from this evening's panelists. And wish you well. Have a great evening, and thank you very much.